You're not going to believe what happened that morning. It started out like any other Tuesday, but by the time the sun hit its highest point in the sky, something inside me had shifted forever. Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. Okay, so let me take you back. It was early spring, the kind of morning where the air feels crisp but not cold, and you swear you can smell the earth waking up. I had just settled into my home office, cradling a mug of cinnamon coffee between both hands, still in my robe, hair pinned up in one of those clips I found in the bathroom drawer years ago and never replaced. I wasn't expecting anyone, least of all him. My boss, Richard, had always been, well, professional. Polished shoes, quiet eyes, and a voice that rarely rose above a calm, measured tone. We worked together for nearly 6 years, and not once did I see the man break stride. Always composed, always on. So when I heard a knock at the door, an actual knock, not a delivery alert or a neighbor needing sugar, I peeked through the front window and nearly spilled my coffee. There he was, standing on my porch, wearing that dark charcoal coat he always wore on cold days and holding a paper bag in one hand. I opened the door with confusion wrapped around every word. Richard. Hi, he said with a slight smile, like this was the most normal thing in the world. I was on my way to a client meeting out this way and thought, you might like a fresh bagel. I blinked. A bagel. He lifted the bag as proof. And cream cheese. No raisins. I remember you hate raisins. Now, I should have stepped aside and let him in. Or maybe I should have laughed and asked if this was some kind of joke. But instead, I stood there, suddenly aware of the robe I was wearing and the slippers on my feet, feeling oddly exposed but not uncomfortable. Just uncertain. Can I come in for a minute? He asked. And I don't know why, but I nodded. He walked in, carefully placing the bag on the kitchen counter like it was something precious. I poured him a cup of coffee, strong, black, no sugar, just how he liked it during meetings. We sat across from each other at the table, the morning light coming in through the window and making patterns on the floor like a quiet painting. For a while, we didn't talk much. Just the sound of the spreading knife against the bagel, the clink of his spoon against the coffee mug, the creak of my old dining chair as I shifted. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was something else. Like both of us knew this moment wasn't really about the bagel. I've been thinking a lot lately, he said finally, setting his cup down. About work. About time. About the people we see every day and barely really see at all. I nodded, unsure where he was going with it. And I realized, he continued, eyes steady on mine, I've never taken the time to tell you how much I respect you. Not just for your work, for the way you show up, for how you carry things even when it's hard. Something in me softened at those words, maybe because no one had said anything like that in a long time, or maybe because I'd have always kept my head down, doing what needed to be done, never expecting anyone to notice. Thank you, I said, a little surprised at how small my voice sounded. He looked down for a moment, then back up. It's strange, isn't it? How easy it is to go years without saying what matters. The air felt thick with something unspoken, not romantic, not dramatic, just human, real. And in that moment, sitting across from him with half a bagel in my hand and morning light warming the side of my face, I realized that something had changed. Not because he brought breakfast. Not because he showed up unannounced. but because for the first time in a long time, someone truly saw me. And I hadn't realized how much I needed that until it happened. He didn't stay long after that. Said he had to make his meeting, and I nodded, though part of me didn't want the quiet moment to end. He stood up, pulled on his coat, and paused at the door. "Take care today," he said. And then he left. I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, heart steady but full. I looked around my little kitchen, the sunlight, the crumbs on the plate, the empty coffee mugs. It was still Tuesday, still spring, but something about the air had shifted. And I knew I'd remember that morning for a long, long time. For the rest of that day, I couldn't concentrate. Not on emails, not on reports, not even on my usual mid-afternoon walk around the block. It wasn't like Richard had said anything wildly out of the ordinary. He hadn't made a big declaration or crossed any lines, but his visit stirred something in me I hadn't felt in years. A quiet kind of presence. A reminder that I existed beyond the titles, tasks, and responsibilities that had quietly defined my life. You see, after my divorce, almost 9 years ago now, I built a wall without even realizing it. Not the kind people write poems about, just a practical one, brick by brick, made of meetings and to-do lists, grocery runs, and polite small talk. And inside it, I felt safe, predictable. Until that morning. Until a knock on the door reminded me that connection doesn't always come with a grand entrance. Sometimes it shows up with a Babel. The next few days at work were uneventful on the surface. We had our regular Monday meeting. He gave his usual project updates, and I played my part like I always did. But I noticed small things I hadn't paid attention to before. The way his eyes lingered just a beat longer when I spoke. The warmth in his voice when he said my name. Subtle things, easily dismissible. But they added up. Then came Friday. I was the last one in the office. Most of the team had signed off early ahead of the long weekend. I was organizing some documents, trying to distract myself from a mind that kept returning to that quiet morning. That's when I heard his voice behind me. "You always stay late?" I turned, surprised to see him standing in the doorway of my office. Jacket over his shoulder, that same calm expression on his face. But something in his eyes looked more tired than usual. "I like the quiet," I said. He stepped inside. "I do too." For a moment, we just stood there in the hush of the after-hours office. The hum of the air conditioner, the low light from my desk lamp, the muted blue of the early evening sky outside the window. Everything felt slower, softer. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Okay." He hesitated, then sat in the chair across from my desk, the one clients usually used. "Do you ever feel like your life's gotten too quiet?" The question caught me off guard. I blinked, thought about it. "Yes," I said eventually. But I convinced myself that was a good thing. He nodded slowly. "I think I did too. For a long time." There was a heaviness in his words. Not sadness exactly, more like reflection. A weight of years and choices and routines that sneak up on you while you're busy being responsible. "I'm not trying to overstep," he added. I meant what I said the other day. About respect. And I don't want to pretend like we're just coworkers anymore. Not if we're both feeling something more. The air stilled. That quiet tension, not uncomfortable, but undeniably there, settled between us like the pause before a page turns. I looked at him carefully. Not the boss. Not the man in meetings. Just Richard. Human. Honest. Sitting across from me with no agenda except truth. "You're not overstepping," I said gently. He let out a breath, almost like he'd been holding it for weeks, maybe longer. "I'm not sure what this is," I added, "but I'm not afraid to find out." We sat in silence again after that, but it felt different now. No longer uncertain, just open. Eventually, he stood. "Can I walk you out?" I smiled. "I'd like that." We walked through the darkened hallway together, our footsteps echoing softly against the tile. When we reached the parking lot, the sky was painted in the kind of gold you only get in early fall, the kind that makes you want to stand still and breathe it in. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises, just a simple goodbye. A nod, the kind that carries weight, even without words. As I drove home, windows down, the air crisp against my face, I realized something. The quiet I used to cling to no longer felt like comfort. It felt like something I was ready to grow beyond. Not because of a man, but because someone reminded me that I was still allowed to feel. Still allowed to be seen. Still allowed to start again. That weekend stretched out like a quiet question I wasn't sure how to answer. I didn't go anywhere. I didn't fill the hours with chores or noise. I just let myself feel. I sat with the memory of his words, the honesty in his voice, the way his eyes held mine like they weren't afraid of the silence. I found myself walking more, thinking more. I made soup from scratch. I listened to old records I hadn't touched in years, songs that made me feel 16 again, but with the heart of a woman who'd lived a lot of life since. And somewhere between folding laundry and watching the leaves fall outside my kitchen window, I began to understand something I hadn't let myself admit. I was lonely. Not in the dramatic, desperate way people talk about in books, but in that quiet, ordinary way where you stop expecting anything new, where you stop reaching, where you make peace with a version of yourself that's always giving, but rarely receiving. Richard's visit, his words, it had shaken something loose. So when Monday rolled around, I dressed with a little more intention. Nothing flashy. Just a blouse I hadn't worn in a while. A pair of earrings I'd nearly given away. A soft shade of lipstick that felt more like a whisper than a statement. It wasn't for anyone else. It was just me remembering me. The office buzzed like usual, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the occasional laugh from the break room. I slid back into the rhythm easily, but with a slightly different awareness. I noticed how people moved, how often we all kept our heads down, how rare it was to see someone really look at someone else. Around mid-morning, I got a message from Richard. "Can you stop by my office when you have a moment?" My stomach flipped a little. Nerves, curiosity, maybe even anticipation. I took a deep breath before knocking on his door. He looked up from his laptop, his expression softening when he saw me. "Come in," he said, gesturing to the seat across from his desk, that same seat from Friday. I sat, folding my hands in my lap. He looked at me for a moment, just a moment longer than necessary. Then he spoke. "I thought about what you said, about being open to finding out what this might be." I nodded. "So," he continued, "what would you think about getting a coffee sometime? Outside of work, just two people, no agendas." The question was simple, but it carried more weight than if he asked me to fly across the world. I smiled. "I think I'd like that." He looked relieved, and there was something boyish in the way he relaxed back into his chair, like a man who had just taken a deep breath after holding it for days. "I'm not trying to rush anything," he said quickly. "I just think we've both been on autopilot for a while. and I'd like to know you, outside of deadlines and emails. I appreciated that, the care in his words, the fact that he wasn't trying to impress me or dazzle me with charm. He was just being real. And in a world full of small talk and surface smiles, real felt rare. We didn't set a date or make a plan. We both had a busy week ahead. But the seed had been planted. The air between us had changed. Later that afternoon, I caught my reflection in the restroom mirror. The soft lipstick, the gentle confidence behind my eyes, and I felt a little taller somehow. Not because a man had noticed me, but because I was starting to remember myself. That night, I poured a glass of red wine and sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the houses across the street. The sky turned that perfect shade of deep orange, and for once, I didn't feel the urge to fill the silence with music or noise. I just let the breeze brush against my skin and closed my eyes. I didn't know where things were going with Richard. I didn't need to. What mattered was that something in me had awakened. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was stepping into the second act of my life, not as a woman waiting to be chosen, but as someone ready to choose, to open doors, to speak truth, to let herself feel again. We never did rush that coffee. It happened 2 weeks later on a quiet Sunday morning. He texted just a simple message. There's a little place on Hawthorne with good coffee and bad parking. Want to meet me there? I stared at the message for a long moment, smiling before my fingers even moved. Sounds like a challenge. I'm in. The cafe was one of those cozy spots with mismatched chairs and the smell of roasted beans soaking into the walls. I got there first, chose a corner table near the window where the morning light came in warm and low. I wore a sweater my sister had given me years ago that I always said was too soft to wear out. That morning, it felt just right. When Richard walked in, he looked a little unsure, his usual collected self slightly softened by weekend clothes and the vulnerability of being somewhere new with me. He spotted me, smiled, and slid into the seat across from me like we'd been meeting at that table for years. We didn't talk about work, not once. We talked about music. He loved jazz. I loved folk. We talked about our childhood homes, the teachers who changed us, the things we thought we'd be by this age, and the things we actually became. He shared about the years he spent trying to be everything for everyone, how exhausting that was, and how little space it left for him. I understood that, more than I could say. And I shared my own truths, too, about the quiet ache that crept in when the house got too still, about how I'd lost pieces of myself slowly, the way fog rolls in, so gentle you don't realize you were standing in it until you can't see the road anymore. But that morning in that corner cafe with the chipped mugs and sunlight on the table, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not excitement. Not butterflies. Just a deep, quiet knowing that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. After that morning, we didn't become anything dramatic. No whirlwind, no sweeping gestures. Just two people learning to show up for each other in small ways. A lunch here, a walk there, and slowly the rhythm of our lives began to make room for each other. He'd drop off coffee when he knew I had a long day ahead. I'd bring him lemon tea when I could tell his voice was tired from too many meetings. We didn't need to name it. We just let it be what it was, real, slow, and grounded in something that had nothing to do with filling a void and everything to do with mutual presence. One evening, months later, we sat on my back porch under a sky full of stars, the kind of night where everything felt settled. He was quiet, sipping tea, and I was leaning back in the old wooden chair that creaked every time I shifted. And out of nowhere, I said, "You know, the morning you showed up at my door with that bagel, I think that was the first time in years someone saw me without asking for anything in return. He didn't respond right away. He just reached across, gently placed his hand over mine, and gave the softest nod. "That's all I ever wanted to do," he said. We stayed like that. No rush, no pressure. Just two people with pasts, with stories, with scars, choosing to be present in the quiet moments. And now, when I think back to that morning, the knock on the door, the surprise, the warmth of his voice, I don't think about the bagel or the coffee. I think about how life changes in the most ordinary moments. How someone showing up, simply and sincerely, can be enough to open a part of you that had long been asleep. And I think about how sometimes the second half of life isn't about grand gestures or dramatic reinventions. Sometimes it's just about allowing yourself to be seen. And finally, seeing yourself, too,